Hey everyone, welcome to How to Make Your Own Miniatures Game. This is episode 2. I am Rick Graham, owner of White Light Media and creator of the Revelation Skirmish and Field of Legends miniatures games. Now, if you missed the first episode, my process for this show is to try to keep it very conversational. Try to keep it as if I was talking to a friend on the phone or over Discord. So this show isn't as polished as some of the other podcasts out there, but I want it to feel more authentic than being super edited and everything's absolutely perfect, because I feel that the content is what matters most, especially to you, because you're listening to this because you want to make your own miniatures game, right? So building games isn't linear. And today we're going to talk about hiring artists. I know that may seem out of order of things, but that's where my head is right now. I'm deep in the trenches of getting concept art and now models started for Field of Legends. And so I've got a lot of stuff going on in my mind there. I will preface this that all that I'm about to say comes from an entrepreneur's perspective, from a creator's perspective. I myself, my gift is in writing when it comes to creative processes. Like I can come up with all kinds of ideas for characters and all these other things, but like I don't have any artistic ability really when it comes to drawing, sketching, painting like in illustrations or in other, artwork for canvases. And I'm also not good at 3D modeling. So my perspective is someone who needs others to fill those roles for what I need for my projects. All right. You may be someone who has some of those abilities or all of them. But either way, I know that some people may not like what I have to say or may not like the way that I do certain things. I'm trying to cover things, like I said, as if I was helping a friend. And sometimes you're blunt about things, and sometimes things aren't rosy and sunshine because it's business. So there has to be hard decisions made at times. And sometimes it seems rude, but it's because it's business. It has to move forward the way that it needs to. But everything that I'm going to tell you is my experiences, things that I've learned through this process. I imagine that this episode is fairly long, which you can already see from the timestamps and everything. But I would recommend that in this episode, you do take notes. I tried to organize my thoughts before recording, but there's a lot that goes to this. There will probably be certain things that I have missed and certain things that we will need to come back to maybe at another point if somebody feels like there's something else worth discussing. So the main thing one of the first things that will kind of get into this process for you as you're trying to strike out as a creator is, the question of when should I hire an artist? The answer is whenever you're ready to, whenever you have an idea that you're ready to pay someone for. If you can do the art, it's whenever you're feeling motivated to do it, right? I would ask, I guess just in general, should I do the art? For those who can, ask yourself, should I do the art? And then I would say, well, can you do it? Do you have the skills? Are you someone who can meet relatively professional skill level? And that's also subjective, because I've seen artwork that is from quote unquote the pros and it looks terrible. And then I've seen other things that comes from amateurs and it's gorgeous. So obviously when I say, do you have professional skills? I don't mean, are you on par with the behemoths of the industry? I just mean, are you good enough that someone would want to pay for it? And again, that's also subjective, because especially for myself, I definitely come down hard on my work. I've written 5 novels and a number of other books as well. And I always feel like, oh man, there's so much more I could have done better. And I don't have, the education to be an author and education to be a game designer and all these things. And there's always the presence of self-doubt. Especially when you work really hard and you get a project and a product all ready and it gets to market and you're proud of it, and then nobody really buys it. And then you're like, well, maybe it was garbage the whole time and I tricked myself into doing it. So I go through all of that myself. But, the question remains, do you have quality skills? It needs to at least be where you feel that it's quality. And you will be surprised how many people will pay for work that you deem not that good. And there are people out there. It's just how it is. It's all in the eye of the beholder, right? So some people will see something that is literal hot garbage and someone loves it. And then other people will say, no, that's hot garbage. Who's right? It doesn't matter. It just matters if someone will pay for it, because at the end of the day, everything that I'm looking at when it comes to Revelation Skirmish and it comes to Field of Legends is I don't want this to be a hobby, because it's really expensive if it's a hobby. It makes no sense to me to build a miniature game and pay all these artists for concept work and illustrations and modeling, and then for me to purchase all the infrastructure that I needed to be able to 3D print my models to be able to distribute them, or to set up the overhead to distribute STL files and all these other components that, and all the marketing and all the hours of work and all the stress and the dread and the frustration, to then be like, I did this all just for myself and I didn't care if I made money. Are you crazy? That's thousands and thousands of dollars, hundreds and hundreds of hours, maybe years of your life. If you're just doing it as a hobby, that's great, that's fine. But everything that I'm coming from is from the perspective of I want to be able to make a living at this one day. Right now, I'm not, but I want to. And if it comes to the point where I realize that if the situation were to arise, I've got some great ideas, I love the ideas, but nobody's buying it, well, then I can just go back to just only writing novels, because that's relatively free compared to trying to push a miniatures game. So you want to have quality artwork. That doesn't mean you have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars for each piece, but you need to figure out what your level of professionalism is going to look like for your brand, because you are building a brand. No, you're not Star Wars, you're not Marvel, you're not Star Trek, you're not Battletech, you're not all these other brands. You're a small 1, maybe 2-person operation, but you still need to realize that when you put a piece of artwork out there, it's being compared by the consumer, by the viewer, it's being compared to Star Wars. It's being compared to any other universe that's out there. Now, some people are really cool and they recognize that you're a small business and you don't have the budget that those other companies do. So they sometimes appreciate even when your stuff isn't as good, because it's more real, it's more authentic, it's more genuine than this big corporate Disney-owned overlord that, can get all this content produced. And you're like, well, why isn't it better quality? So stuff for yours, some people will give you some grace. And if they don't, whatever, you move past that. But that's a different episode. So you want to try to have quality work, okay? And this will be a process. This is, you will have to ramp up. You won't be able to launch unless you already have a decent amount of money to invest. You're not going to be able to launch at Games Workshop level, or Fantasy Flight, or Catalyst Games, or name any other WizKids, Wizards of the Coast. You won't be able to jump at that level. You might be able to get some of your artwork there, but unless you have a big budget just waiting to get spent, you're going to have to build up to certain things, and you're going to have to make a lot of creative decisions of which piece of art does what you need it to do. Okay? You might get an idea for a piece of art. Maybe it's a battle scene. Maybe it's a character design. Maybe it's a cool spacecraft. And you're like, man, I would love to be able to have somebody make this, even if it's just concept art. And I just want to see it. I just want to see it brought to life. And I can absolutely respect that. But that piece of art needs to have a mission, especially when you have a small budget. It needs to be strategic, and it needs to be something that you are going to use for hopefully more than one thing. That'll be another thing, how to repurpose your artwork to be able to use it in different ways. That's definitely another episode, because I've had to learn and be creative with how I use things multiple times in multiple ways, because I don't have a budget of millions where one piece of art may only get used once, right? And the big companies, they recycle it too, but just to kind of help you get in that mindset. Now, I will say, because you can always come up with the cons of why to hire someone, but I'm going to come up with the benefits. The benefits of paying someone else first off is that you have more time. Now, if you don't already have the skills to be a big professional painter or concept artist or modeler, if you don't already have those skills, and you might be like, look, Rick, I want to learn those things anyway. Understand that unless you're some prodigy, modeling is going to take you years. Do you want to spend years building your game just for one single model? Maybe you do. Maybe that's fine because you're at a much slower pace. For me, I had to finally get to a place where I'm like, look, I'm not going to learn how to draw. I'm not going to learn how to paint. I'm not going to learn how to model fast enough to be able to move forward with any of my projects. So I need to change my thinking and understand I'm going to instead leverage myself and hire people to fill the gaps that I can't do, because I went through and I assessed, what can I do? Well, I can write. I'm not the best author ever, but I am capable enough to put some words on a page and get it out there and get it published. So it's enough to be able to move forward. So actually, as a side note, I first started with novels because I didn't have any money to invest in a game. And maybe you have a small budget and you're kind of in a similar boat as me where you only have so much money. So I chose to spend my money on illustrations because I was going to double it up as book covers. So instead of going the traditional way of hiring artists, a book cover artist to design me a book cover, I decided to get illustrations made of battle scenes that were going to be inside the book. And so that way I could use those as social media posts. I could use those as posters. I could use those as backgrounds for desktop, computers. I could do multiple things with that image, and I could hire someone else to just convert it into a book cover instead of paying someone to design artwork for a book cover that would only be for that. And if you go in the author route, you'll start to recognize when people use artwork and they convert it for book covers, or they design artwork for book covers. And there is a difference because the way that they set up the image and everything. So it just up to personal preference. But that was my idea, was I was going to leverage someone else. I wasn't going to learn how to be a good artist in any short amount of time. And I think there's something with my brain where I have a difficulty doing that. I know that I have an issue with imagining something that I've never seen before. I've gotten a little bit better at it because I've been doing this long enough now, and I've had to come up with lots of characters and lots of mech designs and other things. But if I were to say, okay, I'm going to come up with a brand new mech, until I start going through my process, which I'll hopefully remember to go over here shortly, I won't know what it looks like. So I couldn't possibly paint it or draw it because I don't know what it looks like because I haven't seen it yet. So that's the way that my brain works. If you're more of an artistic minded person, maybe you see it, but maybe you have difficulty expressing it or explaining it, but you can see it. You just need to get it onto paper or onto a digital screen if you draw that way. So maybe you're completely wired the opposite way. So it makes more sense for me, and from my perspective, hire someone to do the work. I can hire a professional to get the job done, and I don't have to go through all the learning, all that, just because of my setup mentally. Now, I've mentioned a little bit of concept art. If you don't know what that is, my vernacular, because what you'll find is in this industry, not everyone has the same vernacular. A lot of people have the same, but some people have some wacky side interpretation. So concept art, to me, is artwork that you are getting designed or designing that is just the initial concept. It's not the finished design. It may get to a polished finished state, but it is not the finished design 100%. It is the concept. It's the idea starting to be formed. Now, you may go through several phases of concept art development until you get to the final line art, which is more of just like the finished polished piece. But that's up, that's up to you how many times you want to pay for it. A lot of times when I get concept art made, I usually try to get it right the first time. Illustrations. Illustrations is another loose term. That can be paintings. It can be digital paintings. It can be drawings that are finished with markers or with a multitude of other artistic mediums. So illustrations can be a lot of things, but it's more of an art piece rather than just a concept art of a character. It's usually a scene or a location, some scenery. There's other things going on in there. And then models. That'll be another thing we're going to cover. So when I say models, I mean the 3D model, because more than likely anybody listening to this isn't learning how to sculpt with physical clay anymore. So everything we're moving forward with technology. We're only talking about 3D models, and that is another whole art skill to itself. And so by that, I mean the STLs, which if you're into 3D printing, or if you can just, think of like Pixar movies, CGI, all that, where they are designing things usually in the same sort of programs, and those can be used to design your actual miniature models. Now, you might need box art, social media posts, and a bunch of other things, but we're not going to get into that. We're only going to get into concept art, illustrations, and models. Those are my big three focus right now for this episode. If you are ready, you've said, okay, I'm ready to start finding an artist for whatever piece of art you need. There are several different places that you can look for artists if you don't already know someone. So first is Fiverr, fiverr.com. It's Fiverr. It's 2 R's. On there, you can find artists for basically anything. Now, I have used Fiverr a number of times, and actually for Field of Legends, I'm leaning into Fiverr because some of the artists I was using for Revelations, either I don't work with anymore, or they have a different artistic style than what I was looking for. So with Field of Legends, it's a lot more organic characters, meaning just because you will find that when you're dealing with artists, you have to ask sometimes, are you comfortable with fantasy or with sci-fi art? Or are you comfortable with organics or with mechs or tanks? Because sometimes artists are very particular and they're only specialized in one of those areas. Every now and then you'll find someone who can do multiple things. They're good at several. And as a side note, before I forget, because I know this isn't in my notes, when you start talking to an artist, make absolutely sure you ask them to show you a piece of art like you are looking for. So if you are looking for someone to build you a mech or a robot, and all of their sample images are of organic characters or of buildings or spaceships or anything else, ask them to show you a mech that they've drawn. And if they've never done one before, then I would be very cautious of hiring them unless they're cheap. The reason being is sometimes you'll run into artists who say they can do things. Maybe they really think they can, but they don't have very much experience, or they're just absolutely lying to you, and they're not going to be able to do the job to the quality that you need. So make sure that you have seen enough samples of their work that you feel comfortable. If they have no samples, period, that they're willing to share with you, run the other direction. Do not hire someone you've not seen their work. And I would also say be careful. The more that you get involved, you might start seeing people share other people's work and claim it as their own. If you see anybody doing that, also run away because they're probably lying. Okay. So the good thing about Fiverr is, like I was saying, you can find all kinds of artists. You can find concept artists, modelers, although I've never hired modelers there. You can find illustrators. You can find anything, logo makers, all kinds of people are on there. And what's cool about Fiverr is that you enter into an agreement. You do have to pay everything up front, but the artist doesn't get that money until the job is completed and you have accepted it. Now, there are some other things, like if you don't accept or decline the art that they sent you in a certain amount of time, which is usually like 3 days, it'll just auto complete. So you do need to kind of stay up on it. But with Fiverr, it's great because you sort of have a middleman. Now, Fiverr does charge a little bit of a fee depending on what you're doing. So if you agree to like a $20 concept art, there's going to be a little bit of a fee on top of that. So it's not going to be $20 exact. And that fee doesn't go to the artist. It goes to Fiverr and everything. So the downside to Fiverr is that you will find a lot of people that are international. Now, I have zero issue hiring people around the world. And in fact, I've hired lots of people in all different countries. Actually, I probably can't even list all the countries that I've hired people from now. And a lot of the times I'm starting to hire more people from South America and also Asia. Not so many from Europe, still a couple. And so, and some from the US, but the issue that you run into and that we're going to cover later is that you have to make sure that the person can speak whatever language you speak. So if you're listening to this and you're predominantly, Spanish speaking or any other language, German, anything, you want to make sure that the artist can speak your language or whatever language you're speaking to them with. Because for me, they have to be able to speak English very well, not very well, fairly well, enough that I can understand them, because I give some grace and some leniency because, for one, I understand that not everyone's going to speak English as fluent as me, and that's okay. And that sometimes, honestly, you don't always want to hire an American or someone who speaks English in Europe because they can be really expensive. So that also kind of factors into it. So sometimes you have to sort of compromise a little bit, but you have to make sure that you can at least understand them enough. And sometimes people, if you do live meetings like on Discord or something to do like a video chat or voice chat, maybe they can't really speak English so well, but they can write it pretty well. And especially as more of the translating software continues to get more accurate and more readily available, someone not speaking English might not be an issue because they can still translate it and understand it. And that's perfectly fine with me. As long as they can understand what my notes are and they can understand what my edits I need made and they can get it completed and all that stuff, as long as it all works out, I'm fine with it. I don't care what country they're from because that's fine with me. It doesn't bother me at all. So with Fiverr though, the benefit is, to me, the biggest benefit of Fiverr is that, one, I can look through a lot of artists and they're there to make money, right? If you go and you look on websites like DeviantArt, some of those people aren't looking for commission work. They're just hobbyists or just fans that make some fan art. And DeviantArt is a great place to look for artists, but there's a lot of people on there with inactive accounts and there's a lot of people on there with all kinds of things. But with like Fiverr, that the people are there to do a job. So at least they're of the mindset that they want to get hired. Now, some people don't really want to get hired. It's weird, but at least the odds are if you talk to an artist there, they want to make money. So good. So they want to make a deal. If you run into problems though, you have to first try to, because I just had this issue recently. If you do run into a problem with an artist on Fiverr, you do have to try to break or cancel the agreement that you've already made, and then they have to try to cancel the order. If they don't want to, then you will have to contact Fiverr and go through customer support. I feel a little more confident of talking to Fiverr's customer support than I do with PayPal or with someone else that I've dealt with individually on my own. So there are pros and cons, and you'll kind of go over that. Another place you can find artists is social media groups. You can post on Instagram. You can post on your Facebook account. You can post on anywhere that you can think of. You can find people, but it's harder. It takes work. And another place is that you can, like I mentioned before, you can go through DeviantArt. You can go through and try to find, look up whatever you're looking for. If you're looking for 3D models, illustrations, whatever, look through artists doing work that you like, and then you can try to reach out to them directly and try to contact them. I've had some success with that, and I've also not had some success. It kind of just depends, and that way takes a lot of time because you have to go find art you like, then you have to find ways to contact them, then you have to contact them, then you're waiting for them to get back to you, and there's a lot that goes to that. So I've spent many, many, many hours digging through images and doing all kinds of stuff. So I can say the payoff can be worth it, but it can also be frustrating because it seems like you have to take so much time to do it. And another way that you can find people is people you know. Now, I would say if they're friends, I would probably try to avoid hiring them. Why? Because it's business. And unless that person is a professional illustrator or professional concept artist or modeler or what have you, if they do it as a hobby and then you come in with like a business mindset, it may not work out so well. That's up to you if you want to try to make that arrangement. I would try to steer away from it just because of complications. And at the end of the day, if you run into a disagreement, it's easier to fire someone that you'll never see or you'll never see again versus a friend that now you have to break off that friendship, not that you have to break off the friendship, but you know what I mean? Like it'll cause tension, and maybe they will break the friendship up over that. And it's like, then you end up paying for work that you didn't really want, but you didn't want to hurt your friend's feelings. And it's just, you need to be able to be respectful of whoever you're talking to, but it needs to be able to be business, cut and dry business. And where, and I can say that right now, and it probably sounds like I'm kind of arrogant. I'm not. I've given people second, third, fourth, fifth chances at times. I've tried to really work with them with their, they'll have emergencies come up in their life, and then that changes what the deadline will be, or it causes all kinds of other disruptions. So I am a pretty flexible person, but I also recognize that I've had to let several people go. And it for me to think that I would hire my best friend or someone else that I'm close with and then run into those same problems makes me very nervous. So I would try to avoid people Now, once you do find an artist and they're willing to start talking to you, maybe, whatever you ask them and kind of get the ball rolling, you might be asking, well, Rick, what do I need to give to the artist in order to kind of start the process? What I would normally do when I first talk to an artist, let's assume it's not on Fiverr, because on Fiverr they're there to be hired. I would first establish, are you available? And actually, I will ask the people on Fiverr, I'm looking for this type of job. I give them a very loose description. This is what I'm kind of looking for. If they don't have samples readily available, can I see samples of your work? If you're interested in this project, then we kind of move from there. And as far as what I'm actually giving to the artist, because we'll kind of get into negotiating, but as far as what I'm giving to the artist to do the job, I will go through and make notes. So like, let's assume I'm trying to make a generic soldier, sci-fi soldier. All right. I just need a concept art for a generic sci-fi soldier, whatever they're for. I will go create a loose description, and it depends, because sometimes I'm more picky than others. So like when it comes to Field of Legends, there's certain characters in Field of Legends that I'm very open to interpretation by the artists, versus like in Revelations, I'm a lot pickier because things have to kind of fit the brand. With Field of Legends, we're mixing universes, we're mixing genres, so things don't have to match. But in Revelations, if I need artwork made for the Union of Stars faction, that needs to look like the Union of Stars. I can't have an artist come at me with some 1980s design. And they're like, it's cool, it's retro, it's cyberpunk. No, it doesn't fit the Union of Stars, so I can't accept this work. So there's times when I'm very picky, and there's other times where I'm a lot more relaxed, and it just kind of depends. And when you're first starting, you may not know what you want, so you're going to be more relaxed. So when I'm making the notes for a character, for example, like I said, I'll have the description. I'll put whatever details I absolutely want there. I'll also describe a little bit about the character, not much, because odds are the artist doesn't care. And that's just being real. They're probably not invested in your universe whatsoever. They don't know you. You're just a client. When this is over, they'll probably never talk to you again, possibly. So their mind is not there to learn about your universe. They could care less. Only tell them what they need to know to get you the work that you need and move on. This will save you a lot of time and frustration, and it helps them not have to read a book to be able to design one character sketch. So when I'll do the description, cover the things that I absolutely want covered, and sometimes there's certain things I absolutely don't want them to do. So like if maybe like the number of fingers on a character's hand, like if they're an alien race or something, I'll be very specific. 3 fingers and a thumb. I don't want you to kind of, I don't want them to kind of like, oh, let's do 7. No, 3 and a thumb, because in my mind, that's what the character looks like. So I'll just kind of do that. Then what I'll do is I'll try to go find images that are inspiration. I try to specify, okay, this is the primary inspiration, and these are just some other images to kind of help you. Sometimes, a lot of times that works because the artist wants to kind of know what you're sort of envisioning, but you're also coming to them to have an artistic interpretation of the same idea. So I try to find images, just Googling, and try to find certain pictures to kind of help me get close. Now, if I know my generic sci-fi soldier, maybe there's a certain helmet design I want. I'll go try to find that and say, this is the helmet inspiration. And then I'll be like, okay, this is the laser rifle inspiration. Okay, this is basically the uniform inspiration. Kind of, put these pieces together. And what you're trying to do is make it as least confusing for the artist as possible, because maybe they need this information so they can quote you a price. or to tell you how long they think it'll take them to complete it, or they just want to make sure they know what they're supposed to do when they do start the job. And then besides that, I might, if it's important to me, I'll go through the pose. And I'll try to find an image of a character standing in a certain way and be like, okay, this is more or less what I want the finished character to look like. I think when you're doing the inspiration stuff, try to find as close as you can, but also recognizing that you won't probably find exactly what you want. So you can add in more details of like, okay, it's this sort of helmet, but I really want the front to kind of be like this shape, and maybe it's this color if you're getting a colored image. There's a lot that goes to this, and you'll kind of figure out a better process as you go. When I first started, it was messy, and even now I have a much better system in place, and I've hired, I don't know how many artists I've hired now, and I mean, goodness, I couldn't even tell you how many pieces of art we're up to, because it's so many, and I'll still forget certain things every now and then, or the artist just totally missed it because they haven't worked with me before. There definitely is a value in working with an artist more than once. But at the same time, don't work with someone just because they know you. Like once you've done a job with them, like if you don't like it, find somebody else, or be willing to tell them like, hey, I appreciate all the hard work you did, but I really don't like this sort of style. And that's kind of difficult, because when I hired an artist recently, I tried to find a particular style, right, for Field of Legends, which is more of like semi-realistic, just so that it's not hyper realistic. It's kind of a step down from hyper realism, so it looks realistic enough, but it's still, fun. And I found an artist who had a style that I didn't really care for, but they had one particular picture that I'm like, okay. And I even told him, I was like, hey, if you can keep that sort of style when you do my characters, I'm good with it. And he didn't. So it didn't end up working out. It was an art style that was not cool. It was not going to work. And that happens. And we'll kind of get into what to do later when you have an artist that you're unhappy with parts of it. So let's see. Moving on through my notes here. Your notes should be as clear as you can. And I want you to recognize that you are still going to leave out critical things. And the main reason why I know that at some point when you're making a design and hiring somebody that you're going to forget something is because you're going to overlook something obvious, thinking, well, of course they're going to know to do this in this scenario, and then they won't, or they didn't, or they came up with a different idea. And you're like, how in the world did you possibly go left when you clearly should have gone right? And that happens. It just happens. I've hired numerous artists that I thought like I was clear on the description. I was clear on when I would interview with them and I'd tell them like, look, this is what I'm looking for. And then somehow they did not remember. They didn't make notes. Something happened and they forgot. There is a bit of an issue where if you have too many notes, I think it can be too complicated. So if you're hiring somebody, and let's say you found someone for $10 and you give them 3 pages of detailed notes. We're not talking about like double spaced or with pictures, like 3 pages of words. They're probably going to be a little freaked out that is way too specific, right? So you got to try to figure out how to condense it down. So I try to do bullet points. I try to just keep really short sentences. I'm not really, I want my writing, my English in my instructions to be specific enough, but it's not full of a bunch of emotions. It's not full of a bunch of pleases and thank yous. I will put those in as needed especially when I'm doing the critiquing. But when I'm giving like the description of the character, I'm doing like bullet points. I'm trying to keep it to the point that something that they can remember. And the good thing about notes is that if an artist completely misses it, you can go back to your notes and say, hey, this is in the notes. You can say it nicely and respectfully, but it's in the notes. You missed it. So I need it added. I need it fixed. And they got to fix it. That's just how it is. I know one thing that some people are probably going to be wondering is, should I make the artist sign a non-disclosure agreement or an NDA? First off, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give you legal advice. I can only tell you what I do. I know that with Revelations and with Field of Legends, by and large, nobody cares. Why? Because my brands are not at a big level yet. There are a number of people that are now fans of Revelations and growing for Field of Legends as we're ramping that game up. But I know that by and large, there isn't 100 people on the planet that care about secrets and Revelations, like seriously care. There might be casual, but not like, oh my gosh, if stuff leaked. So I don't super worry if the artist says something to someone. There might be times where I tell them like, hey, it's cool with me if you share my artwork in your portfolio because it helps you get more work, but I want you to wait until such a date because I want to do this big reveal. When I'm first starting out, when I first was getting art made, I didn't really care if they showed it right away because their audience probably wasn't my audience and whatever, right? When I started getting into the game development side of things, then I started to care a little bit more, and I would say like, let's wait until I make the post, and then from there you can go ahead and talk about as much as you want. But I just would want them to wait until then. But it wasn't years down the road. It was like a couple weeks or a couple months. So if you want to make them sign an NDA, that's totally up to you. I know I'm not really worried about it. When my brands get bigger, maybe. But in the meantime, it's just one more thing to try to make them have to sign. And as it is, that just adds more headache. And I'm trying not to be a difficult to work with client. I have enough negative traits, I feel like, that I don't really want to worry about that one too. When it comes to work for hire agreements, again, I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you what to do. I'm just going to tell you what I do. I make every single artist sign a work for hire agreement, or on Fiverr, I make sure that their listing either says commercial rights, which is a feature on Fiverr, or I make them send me a custom order and they add commercial rights. So just because on Fiverr an artist doesn't say commercial rights are included, I'll ask them and say like, hey, how much would it be to have commercial rights, or is it already included in the price? Some of them don't care, right? Some of them don't care at all. But I make them have to sign that work for hire if I'm hiring them directly through my own ways, because I want the rights to my art. I am hiring a person to do a job to design a character or a spaceship or a tank or a mech or whatever the piece of art is. My company will own the rights to that when we're done. And that's just the way it is. If the person doesn't want to sign a work for hire agreement or doesn't want to give me commercial rights, then I'm not doing business with them. I won't. I'll walk away. I'll go find someone else, because I have already proven to myself there are lots of artists who will sign, because the thing is in my mind, in my perspective, and you don't want to say this to be rude. You just say, all right, well, cool. Thank you for your time. And you just leave. But in my mind, you're being hired for a job. You didn't come up with the idea for the character. You're not going to do the marketing for the character from the artist. You're not going to do the marketing for the character. You're not going to grow this business. You're not out there dealing with customer complaints. You're not out there promoting this game with your blood, sweat, and tears. So you have no right to the artwork other than the rights that you created it first. And I need you to sign those over, because it's going to be mine when we're done. And it's just part of it. And if someone says, well, I'll sign it with all these conditions for myself, like if it's for me and my deals, and they're like, well, I'll sign it where you can use it for a certain amount of time. We're done. I'll sign it if all these other conditions, whatever. If their condition isn't, I want to be able to still show it on my portfolio, but you get all the rights to it. If it's not that, I'm walking away, because there's just so many other artists out there to find that I don't need to be bullied. And I feel like it is bullying. I do freelance video work, not as much right now with the COVID, but with everything else before that, I would do it as freelance, as a part-time job. If a company or an individual hired me for a job, I wouldn't even think to tell them, okay, this is mine until you make me sign an agreement or you pay me extra. I would assume automatically they hired me to make this commercial for them. It's their commercial, right? But some artists are weird about things, and they want to protect it because no one wants to be that poor guy who did the Nike swoosh where they got paid $20 and then whatever the story is, and then they got, then now it's a multi-billion company. But from the creator's perspective, I'm doing all of the heavy lifting, or I'm hiring people to do the heavy lifting. You are creating one piece of art. Even if they're creating 10 pieces of art for you, you're still doing so much of the work. Don't let them pressure you and make you not sign a work for hire, right? Like they talk you out of it. They're not your friend. Even if they are your friend, this is something serious, because in my mind, this is, again, for me, this is not law giving advice. I don't know if Revelations becomes a multi-million-dollar brand. How do I know that the artist isn't going to come back and say, yo, man, you hired me for X and X dollars years ago, but you wouldn't be where you are now if you didn't have that character art I made for you. And now I need a big fat check, or I'm going to cause a ruckus. And be like, no, you already signed an agreement. I own the rights. And it's to protect you. And it maybe one day you want to sell the brand. Maybe a company comes up to you like, I don't know, Privateer Press says, hey, we want to buy your game. This is a great game. We want to buy you out. Oh, you don't actually own the rights to your artwork, to your miniatures? Well, we can't do business with you. Now you've lost that huge opportunity if you were interested in doing that. And so you got to be mindful of down the road. Don't only look at now. Don't look at how friendly they are. Don't look at how nice they are, or they've said they would never do that. They would never take you for granted. They would never take your, like, I'm going to protect myself because I'm not going to trust them. And it's not to be a jerk. It's just that money changes people. You know, a couple years from now, maybe they'll get desperate, and they need money, and they see me making money. And now after all these years of really hard work, and they want to try to come in and get extra. And it's like, maybe I'd hire you and do work and you can get paid that way, but no, they want to try to come steal it. So for me, I'm going to try to protect it. Right. All right. Moving on. Let's see. Where would I look for concept art? Oh, this is specifically where would I look for different types of artists? For concept art, I would say I would look on Fiverr, or I would look at DeviantArt. Those ones are going to be the fastest. DeviantArt's going to take you a little bit of time, but there's so many people doing artwork that you can, like concept art, that you can find someone who can do it. When it comes to illustrations, I've used Fiverr a little bit, but I would actually more go find people who make the illustrations that are in the style that you want, because maybe you want something that looks much more like a real authentic painting, or you want it to be a digital painting, so it uses a lot more CGI involved. There's a lot of stuff that goes into illustrations. It's not as easy as just someone drawing with a pencil and getting it in a computer and converting it and doing line art. And I know I can say that so easily, like I'm an expert on that, but with illustrations, there's so many different styles that I would try to find someone who does what you like and contact them. When it comes to modeling, I would do the same. I would avoid Fiverr, and I would try to find someone who can do models, or start asking, in gaming groups. That's actually one of the best ways, is trying to find people that are in other gaming groups that you like and try to see if there's someone there that you can contact. Or just asking around, because modeling is a little different in my mind, because when it comes to concept art, it's at the beginning of the stage. When it gets to illustrations, that's just promotional artwork, right? When it gets to models, that is when you need it to be specific and picky, because that's the end of the process. When I get my model and I 3D print it, there's no more edits once it's finished. Yeah, I can go hire someone or hire them again to make changes, but that is the product that will be in the customer's hands. They're going to judge the models way more for a miniatures game or a tabletop game. They're going to judge the physical pieces way more than they judge the artwork. So your concept art can have some imperfections. Your illustrations can have some artistic license to make some adjustments. But when it comes to the modeling, you need to be a bit more specific and a bit more particular, because that's kind of the end of the road of that particular product's process. So you want to find someone who fits what you need. All right. Now, I'm going to discuss a little bit of how much I think you should pay for the different types of art. So with concept art, let's say it's general characters. I would say anywhere between $15 to $30 is, now this may be dated if you listen to this years from now, but for where I am right now, $15 to $30 with a work for hire agreement is fair. Because odds are I need a lot of characters. So my budget isn't there to pay 50 or 75 or $100 for each concept art, because I need to put most of the money into the modeling. So when it comes to concept art for characters, that's usually it. Now, if you're going to try to find someone who can do mechanized things like spaceships, tanks, mechs, battle suits, these are things that are a lot more, there's usually a lot of detail, and there's less people that can do it quality. You will probably spend 40 to 50. And you will definitely find people way above these rates that I'm listing, but that is probably a decent place to look. Now, if you find someone who is mind-blowing amazing, or someone who works for a company that you're a big fan of, they will probably be much more. But you know that their quality of work will be far higher than a lot of the other guys that are out there just getting started in the industry. So there is a pro and con. So if you know there's a particular thing that you want to put more money into because you need it to be of a higher caliber, then spend it as you feel that you need to. But at the same time, when I'm listing all this stuff, there are artists that will take advantage of people. And sometimes it's not on purpose. Sometimes they don't know what the going rate is, or they overvalue their work because of what the going rate is. I've had several artists give me one particular price, and then when I say, well, I need a work for hire agreement, they'll double or triple the price. And I jump ship. I'm like, see you later, deuces. I'm not paying you 3 times your rate, because you're perfectly fine making that piece of fan art for $15. But as soon as I say it's for a business, now it's 50. No, we're done. Or there's just, you'll find lots of people who change their rates or who overvalue themselves. And you don't want to find the cheapest guy out there. You don't want to find the most expensive person out there either. You want to try to find someone in between that can do the work you need with all the other conditions that you need, like deadline, edits, anything else that you need, and can still be affordable. And that takes time to find those people. If I said like every time I do a new model, I've got $1,000, $2,000 to spend, I can definitely find a big list of people that will be happy to take my $2,000 doing their $250 work. So I will tell you that, in business, you'll often hear you get what you pay for. In my experience, that's not true. There are people who I have paid as little as $40 or $50 for a model that was gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. And I've paid $400 for a model that was okay. It depends. You can't go by price alone. Someone sitting down there and saying, man, I'm going to make this kick-ass mech for you. It's only $500. And you're like, wow, $500, that's a lot of money, but I bet this guy's good. Not necessarily. So you have to weigh things by their samples, and you're also weighing a lot of other things, which we'll get into in a little bit, of like their attitude, the way that they talk to you, how quick they respond, how, and all these other factors. You're kind of weighing all these things all at once to kind of figure out, and it still comes down to, do you have money for it? I've had to walk away from artists because they were way too expensive, and they probably could have done phenomenal work for me, but I had a budget, and I'm like, look, this is how much I have to spend. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I got to walk, and I got to go spend more time looking for somebody else that can do the job. And that's part of it. So getting back to how much you should pay for something like illustrations. Illustrations, it can depend. You can get somebody really good sometimes for like as low as like $50. And those can go up to hundreds or thousands, because depending on what type of work you need and the artist and all the other requirements, it can get really expensive really fast. There really is probably no convenient ceiling for illustrations. I couldn't tell you like, $250. That's like the most expensive you'll find. No. It goes up really high. I haven't found the roof yet of that one. So you just kind of got to figure it out. And that's another one, figure out what you feel comfortable with. I've paid $400 for illustrations and they were okay. And then I've paid like $50 and I've been like, my mind's blown. So it just depends. And I've found other guys in between. So it just depends. I would say for really good quality illustrations that have lots of characters involved and special effects like, weapons flashes and everything that they've added in, I would say that's probably going to be 200 to 300. I could easily see 400 and I could easily see like 200. But if you find someone who's like, yeah, man, I'm going to paint this thing with all these spaceships blowing each other up and it's going to be awesome. And it's going to be $30. No, it's not. It's going to look like a doodle. It's not going to be this great illustration. So just watch for that. With modeling, that's another thing where, man, you can get a really amazing deal, but odds are when it comes to models are very likely to take several weeks or several months to get made. Because a lot of the cheaper guys and gals, they probably have a full-time job somewhere else. They probably have other clients. So maybe they're like, yeah, I'll do this design for $80, $120, $150, $300, whatever. Even at $300, they might still have other obligations, many other obligations. And for you, you're like, man, I had to work so hard to save up for $300. And you're telling me it's going to take you 2 months to get this model done for $300? And yeah, it might. And you have to decide, do they fit the art style that you need? And all these other things that go into it. And you have to make the decision. Is it worth it to you? Again, I've had to walk away from people who were cheaper and sometimes they just couldn't do the work that I wanted, or they were too expensive and they had an attitude and we walked away from each other. So it varies greatly. I can't really give you an exact with the models because it changes so much. I will say that for myself, my expectations go up considerably every time we add $100. If I'm hiring somebody for $50 or like less than $200, my expectations are vastly different. I'll be way less picky. When I start getting into the 300 plus range, you can bet your butt I'm going to be specific, and it's not to be super particular about every single little dang detail, but I have a vision. I'm paying $300 or more for it, and I need it to get to what I need it. And that's just it. And you can do that respectfully, but you can be firm. So I can't really tell you exactly what with models or even a range really. I would say that if someone tries to get you to do a design for more than $350, you can probably find someone for less that can do just as good of work. If someone says it's going to be like $500, $600, $800, I would walk away from them unless they are like one of the guys designing Space Marines, right? Like one of those guys, if they said they were $800, I'd probably be like, yeah, I believe it. And if you're going to do that same level of work for mine, and I'm going to get multiple poses or multiple extra parts and things like, okay, yeah, that might be worth it. I've never hired anybody at that range. I know that at some point down the road that hopefully will be like, the $600 range for models. But it just depends. How long should the project take? This also varies. And it varies on what you're comfortable with. When it comes to concept art, I want a turnaround of a single piece of concept art in 2 weeks or less. If you can't do 2 weeks or less for a single piece of concept art, I'm not interested. You better be like so flippin' amazing or give me the most amazing deal of my life, because I normally need that concept art for other things. So like if I'm waiting for that artwork to move into the modeling stage and I've already got a modeler in mind and maybe I'm already even starting to talk to them, I need the concept art done to be able to pass on to them to get the character modeled. So I can't have them taking 8 years to make one single, knight character with a shield and a sword, and then it takes forever. When it comes to illustrations, you're probably a month or less is acceptable for me. And that month or less is going to involve several times of me getting, rough drafts. And I'm like, hey, can we change this? Can we change that? Make some edits. With concept art, I'll usually only do one phase of edits, sometimes two, but usually only one. Rarely do I see a character that I'm like, you nailed it. That's perfect. I have nothing to give you. Just finish it. Like if it's not totally finished. When it comes to models can be a bear. I would say if they're more of an amateur or a hobbyist that's willing to take your project on, you're probably looking at 2 to 3 months. If they go beyond that, there's just so many other people out there. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt to find a new modeler, but like if they said it's going to be 6 months, I'd be like, man, I can go find guys. I can get 2 or 3 projects done in that amount of time with hobbyists. If it's a professional, somebody who does this for a living, I'm expecting a month or less, and it's going to be, again, because it's going to be expensive, it's going to be a really good model. And that's kind of just my general idea. And from there, it varies greatly. Like, are they somebody I really want to work with, or they fit my art style perfect, or are they affordable, but they're very flexible and they're willing to make lots of edits and they're giving me a good deal on multiple poses if I need it, or extra parts. All that stuff starts to change and kind of move in my mind what I need. And that'll just be you'll figure that out as you go where you're more comfortable. Let's go over something. What should you look out for when hiring artists? Like negative things that you want to be like, oh, maybe I should turn away. The first thing for me, right out of the gate, if they won't sign a work for hire agreement, the deal's done. Why? Because I, for myself, need them to sign that agreement. I need them to sign the rights over to me or my company. And if they're not willing to do that, then I'm not willing to deal with them because it's just wasting both of our time. If I'm trying to get them to sign a work for hire agreement and they make their rate jump up, or if they find out that I am a game company and they're going to jump their rate up, or they list a price like on Fiverr, maybe they'll say, oh, $10, I'll make a concept, any character you want, just let me know. And it's commercial rights. And then you contact them and they're like, oh, to do that sort of character, it's going to be 40 or $50. When you first start out and you first start interviewing people and you first start talking to them, and you do need to think of this as you're interviewing these artists, you are hiring somebody for a job. So you need to be mindful, kind of like as a manager or as a business owner, I'm hiring someone to be part of my team. Even if it's for only one project, you're still hiring them for a particular job. So you need to be of the mindset as a business owner of, would I want this person on my team? Even if it's only for the one job. Because if you're just getting a bad feeling, maybe you just break it off. And one of those is the rate jumps up. That makes me a little cautious. Now, I've talked to enough artists. I've talked to, my goodness, it's got to be over 100 artists now that I've talked to and worked with. And not all those have I worked with, but when I combine the two, I kind of have a decent idea of my comfortable going rate that I'm willing to pay for my projects. What I feel is fair based on all the other factors that I'm weighing. And if they are outside of that, then I just leave. I just break it off and I'll go find someone else. Another thing to look out for, if the artist seems desperate, do not work with them. Why? There are lots of people, especially right now with everything going on around the world, that people need financial help. I'm not saying don't hire someone who needs some money. I'm saying don't hire someone who's desperate. What will happen is they need to be paid. And not everyone. There will be some people with strong integrity that I would still hire even with this rule, but I'd say it's definitely something I would recommend you stay away from. When they're desperate, they're going to be in a hurry. They're going to be impatient. They're not going to do their best job. Why? Because they need the money. And it's not to kick people while they're down. It's absolutely not like that. But the thing is I want this business to be how I provide for my family. And because just about every dollar that I've invested, I would say 80% of the money that I've invested into Revelations, for example, has been out of my own pocket. Once I started making some money from it by selling the game, I was able to reinvest some money from that directly. But I've invested a lot of money out of my own pocket. So if I hire an artist that messes me over or doesn't do the job that I need, now I got to go hire another artist and pay them too if I wasn't able to cancel the other arrangement. So it's serious. This is future investment money for me. And I try not to take advantage of people. I try to make sure that they get the deal that they feel comfortable with, the deal that I'm comfortable with. Everyone's happy with the rate. Everyone's happy with the deadline. And everyone at least has a rough idea of the general expectations. And then if I start getting yanked around, then I'm out. because I've already done my due diligence to make them happy and to try to make them feel comfortable with the project. And if they're desperate and they're going to start cutting corners, I'm not interested. And I did have to let a guy go who did need money. And I didn't like that. I wanted to help him out. I wanted to work with him. He was more expensive than I was necessarily comfortable with, but he was willing to help me with where I was, and he was giving me multiple poses. And so I was willing to give him a shot. And the first couple of projects worked, and then I started kind of figuring out he needed money more and more, and he started making comments about things, and it sucks because you want to be able to help people. One of the things that I want beyond providing for my family, for my brand, with my brands and with my business, I want to be able to hire people to live their dream job. Like if they have a great skill of painting or artwork or modeling, I want to be able to provide some of these people that really need an opportunity to get into the industry. I know how hard it is as a creator to get people interested in you, and I can only imagine how hard it is to find a company that values you enough to pay you a decent rate, over and over and over. And I want to build a team. I want people to work with me and that I can count on, and that they know my general expectations and I know their workflow, and we kind of just understand each other to make it go faster. It hasn't always worked that way. And it's been unfortunate because I want that. I do desire that, but I'm not going to allow someone to manipulate me and take advantage of my money and of my time and of me personally because they're desperate. And I've been in those bad places where you only have a couple $100 that you make a month. Like I've been there. So I know what it's like personally from experiencing it too. It's not only like I am far from a wealthy person right now. So I get it. I do. I really do get it. But you have to be careful because you'll end up in a bad spot, and you're trying to be a nice person and help somebody out, and maybe they do or don't really need it. And it's not about them being dishonest. It's just that you'll get in a bad spot and you might get taken advantage of. And how many times can you do that before that starts to affect your project really badly? Because if you're someone like me, odds are you probably have less money than I've had to invest, because I was very blessed in 2019 to have some extra money that I was able to earn so that I was able to invest in Revelations. I've changed the way that I'm trying to do my business model with Field of Legends to get it funded. So it's different. So I understand, your investment money, you may only have a couple $100, maybe $1,000, maybe $2,000. That doesn't go that far when you're dealing with lots of models. So just be careful. Okay. The other thing that I look out for when I'm hiring artists is, put it kind of nerdy, is if your spidey sense is tingling. If you got a bad feeling, you probably should listen to your gut. So as I mentioned, there was an artist recently that I had to break off the arrangement that we had. I hired them to do a number of designs, and I just kept getting this weird feeling because we kept going back and forth on what I needed. And I'm like, there's something weird here. Like they keep flip-flopping. They're not getting it. Maybe this just isn't going to work. And I didn't listen to myself. And then I ended up having to waste like a week and a half dealing with this person that couldn't do the job that I needed, when if I would have just listened to myself, I would have avoided all that. So sometimes it's important to listen to your gut if you're getting a weird feeling about somebody. Moving on to, what do you do if you have hired an artist and things are going badly? This is not fun. It's never fun, but it does happen. Frankly, it kind of depends on what the problem is. Are they, have they nailed 98% of what you need, 99.5% of what you need? Is it worth arguing over the last tiny little 0.5% details? No, usually not. I've had to, even with the models, I've had to just finally get to a place where I'm like, they got really, 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 really close, and understand that maybe at some point I'll hire someone to fix it. But I want it to get done, because you will never get it perfect. So you have to understand perfect isn't achievable and it's not worth pursuing. You have to be okay with it's good enough. And I don't mean good enough like, yeah, you got like 70% of it right. It starts to get really difficult when you're at like the 95% mark to get to 100. You might be able to get to 96, maybe 97, maybe 98, but it's going to be really hard to get it perfect. And especially if you're working with an artist that you're not paying them $1,000 for the design. Because I can promise you, when I finally get to an artist that I pay $1,000, like we are going to be on a new level of this needs to be fixed. And that's not to be a jerk, but it's because I've purposely forced myself to not be overly anal about every little tiny detail. Just because at some point you realize, you got to move on. So one of the ways that you avoid that is you make sure you're very clear on what you need. You're very clear in your notes as best you can. And you hold them to the notes, right? And that when you do edits, when you request an edit, especially because you need to make sure you will always get at least one chance at edits. You need to try to catch as many things as you can the first time. And sometimes I've had to take things on the chin and be like, you know what? I missed that detail. I could be a jerk and say, hey, by the way, could you fix this? And sometimes I'm just like, yeah, I missed it. So I'm just going to own it and we're just going to move on. There's certain characters, like especially when it comes to concept art for certain characters, does it matter if their jacket has 3 buttons or 2? Maybe not. Why? Am I going to get that picky with every little tiny thing? I can't. I don't have the time to. I got more art to do. Another thing is, what do you do? Like if you're hiring an artist and they start to get an attitude. Getting an attitude with me is really a no-no because I try really hard to be very respectful and try to be very considerate of their time. I try, if I'm going to have edits, I try to get it done on the first or second time because sometimes it does require a second edit. But I try really hard to be clear and to give them pictures and to try not to make a lot of assumptions that they won't know and try to help them out because I don't want them to do multiple edits. I want them to get it done as fast as possible because I want it finished. So it works for me too. I don't want to be messing around with one piece of art for 8 months. I want to get it done. But if they get an attitude outside of that, like they start getting pissy with, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do, and you need to make the decision to be like, look, this isn't going to work out, or you need to stick to the contract. There are ways to be very professional. Word your stuff firmly though, and sternly. That is a skill I learned as a manager. You sometimes have to just tell someone, this is what I need done. And you can say it kindly, and you can also leave no room for misunderstanding that this is what I need done. And a lot of times, sometimes when that happens, you have to understand that you're probably burning the bridge with this artist and they may not work with you again. So you have to sort of make the judgment call. This is a $20 project. Is it worth all the stress in my life over $20? Probably not. This is a $300 model. They're giving me garbage work. I need this to be what I need it to be. You got to be picky. You got to be firm, and it's hard. It is hard sometimes because as much as I've had experience being a manager, I'm the oldest of 4 kids. I have my own kids now and I'm married. I have been in leadership positions for years in my life, and I still do not like confrontation. I don't necessarily try to avoid it, but I definitely don't welcome it. I don't go looking for problems. I don't look to cause people stress. So I try not to be disrespectful. And if someone's being disrespectful to me and I've already been super respectful and I'm the one hiring them, we're done. Like the job's going to either end right there and that happened with one artist. It was actually the one that was also that I started seeing was being desperate. He started pushing me around saying, I need money in advance. And I'm like, no, you're not going to get paid in advance of what our agreement is. I'm going to pay you when the job's done. You need to finish the job. And it just ended up not working out, and the contract got broken, and we both went our different ways because he didn't want to edit anymore, because he wanted it to be done, because he wanted to be paid, but it wasn't at a quality that I could give to my players. And that decision has to be made sometimes. There's a litany of other things to do. What do you do if the artist and some things are going badly? I would reference the notes, and I would reference if you signed a contract, like a work for hire agreement. This is not legal advice, but in your work for hire agreement, there should be certain clauses, and you should be able to use those clauses. And I have, and actually I did, because that same artist, once we broke the arrangement, he actually came back after and said that I needed to pay him even though the work wasn't finished. And I was able to say, well, our contract says that if I don't approve of it, the work's not done. And I've already given you all these notes, and I think we were past the deadline. There was all these things. I had this big list of stuff, and I'm like, I'm not paying you another dime. I've already let you have the down payment. I didn't even ask for that back. So you're not going to come to me and ask me for more. And I was super professional. I was super corporate with my response, and that was it. So that sort of subject can have a lot of things. So it's difficult to cover all of them. But if you've done your due diligence to make sure that they understand going in what your expectations are, and you've tried to be very clear with what your expectations are, you shouldn't have a problem. If you do, you reference what you've said, right? As best you can. Now, let's go over my rules when hiring an artist. So for me, one of the first things off the bat, obviously they have to sign the work for hire agreement. That's for me. They must speak English fairly well, although this is subjective and it depends. If it's a relatively easy job, I'm okay working with someone who's less fluent. If it's something very specific, I need them to speak English as well as possible, because even though they speak English, it doesn't mean they're going to understand me. Even with pictures, even with notes, even with voice chats, it still doesn't mean they're going to get it, but it increases the chance, or at least the ease of communication. And like I said, sometimes that's still not going to work out. Another thing that is an absolute rule is they have to be willing to accept edits. One thing that I have found, and I don't say this to brag, one thing I have found is I have heard again and again from artists that they've typically not had a client who knew what they wanted so well. And I look at that as a lot of people are hiring artists and don't really know what their expectations are, and they're happier with different types of results that maybe I wouldn't be. And as I stress again, I try to be as respectful and as upfront with everything that I need, because I want them to go into this arrangement with eyes wide open. I don't want them being, Rick, you tricked me. You got me into this, and then you ended up taking advantage of me. Like, I don't want that. I'm not trying to do that at all. I'm not trying to manipulate anybody. But I need what I need. And based on price, based on other things, that fluctuates to how picky I am. But sometimes, to keep in your mind, things to help make the artist be happy with the arrangement is that you aren't too picky. You need to be selective of what battles you're going to fight and which ones you're not. As I mentioned earlier, there are going to be times where you're like, okay, it's good enough, brain. You need to move on. You need to be able to tell yourself, look, yeah, he got the foot a little off. I wish that it was modeled a little different. But my main thing is we got to get the gun right, because he's way off here. And you pick your battles. And sometimes I'll still it's not like I'm only going to make edits on one thing, but there are certain times where they've edited the foot, as an example, several times, and they're just not getting it. But we're close enough that I'm happy enough. Or there's a little bit of clipping with the models, which is when, like, if, for example, if you had a shoulder piece of shoulder armor and maybe like a cloak, and when you look at the model, you can tell that the cloak sort of just disappears into the shoulder armor, not naturally, just because the models just kind of clip into each other. You got to sort of pick your battles. Like, is it noticeable enough that the players will probably notice at the scale of the models, or is it just so slight that no one's gonna care? And it's like, when it's stuff like that, move on. When it's something serious, like, look, man, his helmet is disappearing into his neck, right? We need that fixed. But if it's something super tiny, you just kind of gotta pick with what you feel is worth fighting. Another thing to help make the artist happy is you pay quickly. Okay. When the job is done and you've got your part, because typically a lot of the jobs that I do, I pay at the backside, or at least most of it is paid at the backside when the project is finished, once they've delivered it, because I need them to deliver the model. If it's a model or if it's concept art or whatever, I need them to deliver it to me, especially when it comes to models, because I need to put it into my slicing program. So I need to be able to rotate the model, look at it, make sure it's finished. And then once we know that it's 100, like we're good to go, maybe even after I've done a test print to make sure everything was successful, assuming that it's not a support problem because of me and I was an idiot. But if it's something that they need to fix, and I tell them, like, look, I need this fixed. And, but I try to make people know that, especially for myself, being a freelancer, I understand how important it is and how much more enjoyable it makes the project when I know I'm going to get paid at the end, versus it's going to take me 2 weeks or 30 days to collect a payment. I don't like those jobs. I like the job where I get paid like when it's done. So I try to make it a point to pay my artist 24 to 48 hours after the job is done, after it's delivered. I also try not to, and they don't know this, but for myself, so that I can pay quickly, I try not to ever enter into an agreement that I don't already have the money sitting in the bank. Now, sometimes if like the job's going to take a month and you know that you're going to get paid from your regular 40-hour week job, that you're going to have enough to pay for the whole thing at the end of that, that's up to you if you want to make that, that close. But for me, I try to make sure I have the money already sitting in the bank and that I've set it aside for that artist. And they don't necessarily have to know that, but it's just so that if they get done early, I can pay quick. The other thing is that and I've mentioned this before, but just to kind of reiterate it, because I know this podcast is kind of long, you have clear expectations. The artists are not going to be happy if you're like, okay, here's all my expectations, and they go and they do it. And then you're like, okay, that was great, but I forgot, another 5 things. They're not really going to be super happy because they've already done all the work, right? Now, I've had that happen where I've had to say, look, I forgot this detail. Could we please add this one thing? But if there was a bunch of stuff and I totally missed it, that's my fault. Recently, I had a character design. It was a Minotaur for Field of Legends. And I had a rough idea of what I wanted in my head, but I wasn't super picky. And I'm like, okay, here, like I want a Minotaur. And I kind of described it a little bit, but I wasn't super detailed. I was just kind of like, this is kind of my idea. Let's see what he does. And he didn't get anywhere near what I wanted. I was looking for more of like a sci-fi Minotaur, and he went with like a fantasy barbarian Minotaur. And that wasn't at all what I wanted. But the idea kind of continued to refine after I gave him my notes. So it was my fault. I'm not going to be mad at him for not designing something because he wasn't psychic and could read my mind and in the future. So no, I ended up actually hiring him again to redesign it, but this time with more specific notes. And I told him what happened. I kind of came up with more details after I already finished it, so let's do it again. And that was on me, so I had to eat the first concept art price because that was my bad, and it just was what it was. So try to have clear expectations of what you're looking for, and be clear with them, when you need it done, and they have to agree to that, and all the other things that go along with the expectations. Things to avoid. This is sort of like what to look for when you're hiring, and my rules kind of, but it's sort of some different things that kind of maybe help you if you don't have experience with hiring people, or at least hiring other content creators for you. I don't pay for the whole job up front, except when I'm doing on Fiverr because I have to. But the artist doesn't get paid until I approve it on Fiverr. When I'm dealing with an artist directly, I will not pay for art up front. I will not. Because here's the problem. When we're dealing with, like when you go and you have a 40-hour a week job, there's a different sort of arrangement. You're going to get paid after you've done the job, right? And you've put your hours in, you're going to get a check. When you're dealing with an artist, a freelancer, their leverage over you is they have the art, So you need to pay them. Your leverage over them is they have your art and you're not going to pay them until you have your art. And in this circumstance, I recognize that some people won't maybe agree with this, but I will pay a certain percent up front depending on what type of job it is. If it's less than $40, I'm not going to pay up front because it's $40. If it's a couple $100, or this is going to be something that's going to take them a month or two because it's modeling, I'm willing to pay part of it up front. I will not pay the rest until I have seen the finished product. And when it comes to models, I won't pay for the rest until I've had it myself in hand and I can make sure that the file is complete. Because if I go ahead and send them the money and then they send me the model incomplete and then I'm like, hey, I need this fixed, they could just easily be like, well, you got to pay me. I'm going to do it. So that has always been a thing in my mind, is I'm not going to pay until the job's done. It's just the rule. It's just my rule. Another thing to avoid, this is my rule, but I broke it recently and I learned my lesson and I'm back to it. So I want to make sure I teach it to you. Only hire for one job at first. I don't care how good the deal is. I don't care who they are, what they can do, what their skills are, what their resume is. Hire them to do one job first, then hire them for more if you want. Don't enter into a contract with a bunch up front. So this is normally my rule because I know that I'm sometimes a fairly picky person. I know that some people don't have the skills that necessarily I'm looking for. And that's not to knock them. I'm looking for certain styles, right? So I know what I need and I'm looking for that. And I know that sometimes people will say one thing, like they can meet a deadline, but then they don't, or they aren't willing to do a bunch of edits like I need them to, or whatever. So it's kind of a trial run if you hire them for one job at first. If you try to hire them for a bunch, like 10, maybe you have to pay them up front for like 3 of the designs. So then if the first one or the second one, and then you run into some problems and then you need to break the contract, you've already paid for 3 and you're out of that money. You can ask for it back, but I mean, what are you going to do? They live in another country, possibly. What court are you going to take them to get your money back? So you want to try to protect yourself as best you can, and you can figure out those things by hiring them for one job. I will sometimes tell the artist, if things work out, there may be more work on the other side. That doesn't always work. Sometimes they're still a jerk, or sometimes they're still not, they've embellished their abilities. And other times it does change their attitude and they're willing to make more edits than maybe what was agreed to in order to make you happy. And so you can use that sometimes to help you. But the first job is a trial run. I broke my own rule. I hired an artist to do concept art for characters, and he was going to give me a better deal because I was going through Fiverr, and every time you do a Fiverr transaction, you get a fee. Well, the fees started adding up when I'm doing all these characters. I'm trying to get done 35 characters. That's a lot. Well, 35 fees ends up being a lot of extra money that I didn't want to spend. So I started trying to ask artists like, hey, can we do a batch? And I was talking to this one guy and I was like, hey, I'd like to do a batch. And he's like, yeah, no, that's not a problem at all. And we ended up agreeing to doing 6 designs. Well, come to find out, I did not like the first design. This was actually one of the guys I mentioned earlier. I did not like the design at all. It was not going to fit the style for Field of Legends at all. And we were going back and forth and we couldn't get it to work. And I was like, look, let's just cancel it. And he didn't want to cancel it because that was going to affect him. And I didn't want to, I was trying not to put him in a bad spot because I'm kicking myself too, because I know my rule: hire for one, then hire for more. And instead I jumped to 6 with a guy I've never worked with before. And we finally, we ended up basically breaking it off, and I paid him for one of the designs that he did because he had to redo one because it wasn't going to work. And it didn't work. He was super nice. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with, he just didn't have the art style that I needed. And that was my fault. That was my fault, and I felt bad, and I know I put him in a bad spot, but I'm like, it's a lot of money. I can't just throw the money away. I need it to help me get the other characters. So I made a concession of, I'll eat the one design, and then you'll refund me we broke it. But basically, I got money back for 5 of them. So I was willing to live with that. But if I would have only done one with him, I would have known this isn't going to work. But I entered into an agreement right out of the gate. So don't do that. Hire for one. If they ever lie to you, drop them. If you ever find out that they've lied to you, even if they won't admit it, but you know that they lied, get rid of them because they're going to lie again. I know that sometimes people will tell white lies. I try not to lie, period. I try to be very upfront and try to be transparent as needed. But if I get lied to, that's a big no-no for me because I need to be able to trust the artist, and I need to be able to, if they start saying like, oh man, something came up, and you start finding out that it's nonsense and they're lying to you and they're just making excuses again and again and again, you got to drop them because it's not going to work out. Maybe you can muscle through that one design, but like don't hire them again. If the artist ever gets angry with me with edits, that's usually another thing that I try to avoid. And I'm like, okay, this isn't going to work because I try to be aware of their circumstance and I don't want them to do work over. And I stress really hard of trying to get the notes accurate and what I want and everything. I try really, really, really hard to be on top of it and to respond quickly when I do need edits or approve things, so that they're not waiting on me for weeks or that they're not waiting on me. And sometimes I drop the ball. It's sometimes very hard hiring multiple artists at a time when you're working full time or you have a family and you have all these other life obligations. It's tough, but if someone gets super upset with edits, that'll probably be the last job that we do together. If they continuously raise their rates, sometimes people will lure you into a deal and then they start being like, oh, okay. Now this one's going to be this much more. Now it changes. Now, if your design has gotten a lot harder, odds are you should pay more. If your design has gotten more complicated, there's more parts to it, odds are you should pay more. But if it's basically being the exact same level of work and it keeps going up $50, $100 at a time or something, then you should probably look for someone else because either they're trying to bait you up to a higher rate or something else is going on and you need to try to reassess and maybe just straight up ask them like, what's going on? Like we agreed to this rate and now all of a sudden we do 3 more designs and now we're up $200. We're up $150. Like what's going on? And maybe there's something that you guys can talk through. Maybe it's you're doing too many edits and you need to be more specific, more to the point on the upfront or something else. Maybe there's something you can fix. But that's something that will usually be a turn off for me. And I don't expect them to charge the same rate indefinitely. Like if I worked with a guy for a year or 5 years, it's not unreasonable to think that the rate will go up at some point, but it's more of like, if every single project is going up, it's kind of an alarm to me. If they won't send you the files you need. So if they're kind of holding your files hostage, that'll be the last time I work with them. Straight up, no, I'm not putting up with that. Another thing that I would say to avoid, but it's not necessarily like a make or break. This is more of like what you're comfortable with. I would not recommend trading with the artist. I would recommend it to be money. Technically you're trading money, but I wouldn't trade them a service. I wouldn't trade them whatever else, because if you're like, hey man, you make this piece of art for me and I'll write you a short story, or I'll pick anything else that you have a skill at. Maybe you'll paint something for them like a model, or you'll do something else. Sometimes trading can work. I've done trades before, so I'm not immediately against them, but I would recommend to keep things cleaner, not trading, because maybe you fulfilled your side really fast, but then they didn't. Well, now they've already got from you what you were going to do for them. And now you have no other leverage. If they haven't been paid from you yet, you still have the leverage. And that it's not to be a jerk. And maybe it's more of an American thing, because I've heard some people make jokes before about how Americans are with paying people. It's just to protect you from getting taken advantage of. By and large, I've worked with a lot of artists. I've worked with some for over a year. I've worked with some for 2 weeks. It just depends. And this is definitely a learning experience. And sometimes your needs outgrow what the artist can do, or sometimes you don't work with that artist anymore because you've shifted gears. Like maybe you're done with, you don't need as much character design. Now you need a lot more mech design or a lot more tanks or mechanized objects. So now you've had to switch and find a new artist, or, you're done with your concept art. Now you've moved on to modeling. It doesn't mean every time you've finished with an artist that you've broken off the relationship. It just means that sometimes that door has temporarily closed because you don't need them at the moment and you have to move on. I would say do not feel any sort of obligation to hire somebody, and that's why I try really hard. Not like I want to be friends if I can with the artists. And I know some of them might be listening, but at the same time, I have to do what I need for my business. And I know that they understand that because I try to work with very mature people. So I know that they get it too. And I try not, and I don't want to take advantage of them. I want to pay them the rate that we've agreed to when it's done right away. I don't try to hold anything up for them. I try to be considerate of their time. And, I've had to work with a lot of hobbyists, so they have family obligations and a full-time job and other things going on. And I try not to be unrealistic with my expectations up from them. So it's a lot of stuff. And I know this has been a long episode and you probably paused it several times, but there's a lot to this. There really is. And I mean, at the end of the day, as long as you remember you're working with another human who has their own needs, and you just try not to be a jerk and you try to be fair and be even with the arrangement and be transparent, I think it should be okay. You will definitely run into plenty of people you don't want to work with again. You will run into plenty of people that you get a weird feeling of and you don't want to hire. You'll run into lots of people who aren't available or who are too expensive and you can't hire. And then you'll find some people that you like and that you jive with, and you can, get some designs done and you can move forward with some projects. And it's a really cool feeling for me, because I'm not artistic, that when I get art made, I'm so excited because it's something I couldn't do, but it's mine. And it's helped breathe life into my idea that I couldn't do. So it's a really cool feeling. And, but don't rush finding an artist until you need to. But when you do, hopefully some of the stuff that we've covered in this will help you. I know it was a lot, but it's a big thing because it's kind of like teaching you how to start your business in terms of hiring talent. It really is. And it's a big topic and there's a lot to it. And I'm positive I left certain things out just because I just forgot. And it's just part of the process. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for listening. If you've listened to this far, I enjoy doing this. And I'm, as I mentioned before, game making, creating your own miniatures game is not linear. You will jump around. You'll be hiring an artist while you're still working on rules, or while you're working on another piece of art. You'll have one artist doing one and another artist doing another. And that's just part of the process. So learning to kind of keep the plate spinning, or, keeping the juggling going is part of it. And just do what you feel comfortable. Don't go hire 10 artists when you've never worked with one. But don't be afraid of working with like 2 or 3 if you're ready to ramp it up a bit. All right. Thank you guys again. I'm looking forward to the next episode, and talk to you guys later. Bye.